Hello and welcome to the Spotlight. I'm Kaveh Taqwai. Iran's sanction removal, or the JCPOA revival talks, continues with its ups and downs. And currently, it is in a down mode. First, the three European parties to the JCPOA have questioned Iran's intentions and actually commitment to a successful outcome on the JCPOA over Iran's calls for a settlement of what's called the safeguards issues between Tehran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, in this edition of the Spotlight, we will look at where things stand on these talks and the destructive role that Israel has played from the IAEA to the E3 countries and to the U.S. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of the Spotlight. Yousof Azizi joins us, an Iranian affairs expert from Washington, D.C. Also joining us is Elijah Magnier, journalist and political analyst from Marseille. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. I'm going to first start with you, Yousof Azizi. We're looking at a quarterly report by the nuclear watchdog on what it has called Iran's compliance with the JCPOA, basically saying that Iran has continued to expand its enrichment and stockpile of highly enriched uranium beyond the limits in the agreement. Is Iran guilty of that?
I don't think so, because there was an agreement in 2015 that Iran would limit its nuclear program and also give access to its facilities, nuclear facilities for the International Atomic Energy Agency to do monitoring. But after President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal, and there is no benefit, legitimate benefit for Iran under the deal. So Iranian also tried to say that we reduce our commitment under the deal. And recently they closed some of the cameras that do the online monitoring. They also suspend the additional protocol that they agreed under the deal. So I think there should be some political solution that all of the parties, especially the United States, go back to the deal, and then the deal would be restored.
Well, when we take a look at the way that this has come out, Iran has, Elijah Magnier, looking at the quote here from Behruz Kamalvandi, the AEOI spokesperson for Iran, a repeat of old baseless and politically motivated issues presenting no new point other than playing with terminology. Something that Iran has leveled against the IAEA. Is the IAEA, in particular the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, playing with terminology or with words?
Well, Rafael Grossi showed that he is not limiting himself to be a professional by being an inspector of the organization and not dealing with politics. So what he's doing is he's going beyond the mission of his job, and he is aligning himself with one side with Israel, that the Prime Minister Yair Lapid calls his friend, and another side with the US demands, allowing a hole in the JCPOA deal by giving the pretext to the Americans to come back with sanctions even when they are signed, if the Americans are willing to sign before Joe Biden midterms elections. So the action of the IAEA is really not professional in this position and in this case, because the IAEA should limit itself to inspect the sites and to give a report to the United Nations Security Council and to the countries concerned about the nuclear activity of Iran and if the program is peaceful or not, but not to say we are not sure if this is a peaceful program. This assumption and speculation is not part of the job of the IAEA. Hence the position of Iran that is standing firmly against the unprofessional behavior and statement of Rafael Grossi that should limit himself to respect his job and give the proof of what he's finding and not speculating about what he's not finding.
In particular, however, Yousof Azizi, when we want to talk about enrichment, it seems that the IAEA Director General is presenting a view that perhaps he may not remember of what Iran has stated before when it comes to enrichment. For example, Iran has informed the IAEA of enrichment in the past. It's been an occurrence where they come out, the Iranian side, and makes that announcement about their enrichment activities. In addition, Iran has said that its moves away from the 2015 deal could be reversed if the U.S. returned to the accord and lifted sanctions based on one of the viewpoints that Iran has had. Why does the IAEA Director General make it seem like Iran is not informing it of its enrichment?
Yeah, I agree. We had the same issues before the original deal in 2015 was signed. And during that time, between 2002 to 2013, there were many open files against Iran nuclear program. There is many questions that the IAEA, the agency, had about Iran. And Iran said, all of them, we are ready to cooperate with you, but there is a need for roadmap to finalize, to settle down everything, because it is not an open-ended question. When we answer one question, based on our answers, you provided 3 more answers, and it's going on and on. So what happened during the between the July 2015 and January 2016, when the deal was really implemented, is that the political aspect and the political force of the Western countries should, force the IAEA director, then IAEA director, Yukiano Amano, that close all of these, come to the agreement with Iran with a roadmap to close all of these files. Today, Iran has the same argument. Iran said, if you want to, that all countries, that the international politics have the sustainable Iran nuclear deal, we need to settle down these issues to have a sustainable, deal for the future, for the years to come. So we have first to finalize and settle down all of these accusations against Iran, because if the deal re-implemented, the United States and Western countries have the opportunity to every time, every second, bring all of these accusations against Iran and limit Iran's benefit from the deal. This is, I believe that this is one of the preconditions that all of the countries, all of the parties around the deal should accept and find a solution, a political solution on that.
Iran safeguards settlement is another sticking point based on the point of view of the IAEA, of which Iran has said, Elijah Magnier, that needs to be settled, that actually the whole revival of the sanctions lifting talks, or the JCPOA revival talks, hinges on the settlement of the safeguard issues. Without that, going ahead with reviving the accord doesn't make any sense. The Iranian president has said that. Do you see that as a valid point, as opposed to others who are critiquing Iran perhaps on this issue?
Well, Iran is not reinventing the wheel here, because Barack Obama, before he signed the deal in 2015, this information about the 3 so-called secret sites, nuclear sites, and unknown development of enriching uranium beyond the radar of the IAEA was dismissed, because it was known that this is an Israeli intelligence information with no credibility whatsoever, because the whole world is aware that Israel is against the deal. So what Iran is saying here is, let us return to the same circumstances and conditions when President Barack Obama, who was the president of the United States and Joe Biden was his vice president, agreed on dismissing these claims that were unfounded and signed the JCPOA. Now, what Iran is asking a guarantee to dismiss these claims for one simple reason. Iran wants to close the door on the Americans to come back with sanctions, saying you haven't responded satisfactory to the IAEA, and you are still hiding some nuclear program that we would like to be more aware of and have more details. And we're not going to lift the sanction, even if we as Americans return to the JCPOA, because they have left and Iran hasn't. We will not abide by the commitment unless you give satisfactory answers. So it's an excuse to blow up again the JCPOA and accuse Iran of not respecting the terms of the JCPOA. So at the end of the deal, Iran is in need to have its money back with the tens of billions of dollars that are frozen in foreign banks, and it's really careless about the JCPOA at the end of the day because it's not really bringing a lot to Iran at this point. However, because Iran is now making a nuclear bomb and saying to the world, I'm ready to inspect all my nuclear sites, facilities, and to take away all your excuses that are given and pronounced in vain, accusing me of perhaps going toward the nuclear weapons, come and have a look yourself. Iran has reached 60% uranium purity, and it's not very difficult to reach a 90%, and nobody on earth can stop Iran from going in that direction if that was Iran's intention. So this is the point, is what Iran is asking today is to remove all the excuses that the Americans can return and impose again sanctions and Iran be accused of not respecting the deal.
Well, that's an important point that's being made there, Yousof Azizi. And to elaborate more on this, it seems like the IAEA Director General is on purpose trying to create an air of ambiguity when it comes to this whole I mean, we could talk about the technical side of things over here, like an enrichment and the purity level, etc. But as our guest there pointed out, well, Iran, if it wanted to, can reach the 90% purity. But never once has the IAEA come out and said, that's it, Iran has reached the point where it's weapon grade level in terms of the status of its enrichment. It has never come out and said that, but it has come out and said, well, there's this area here and the percentage of enrichment has increased, and we find some particles here and there, and yet again at the same time, I should say, Iran has been under the harshest and strictest IAEA inspection regime ever in its history. So is it correct to look at it that way?
Yeah, if they didn't do such an act, so what's the purpose of that organization? So it is very important for the IAEA to show its commitment to the technical issue. But on the other hand, as you said, under the NPT that Iran, since the previous regime, the Shah of Iran, Iran accepted and signed the NPT. Today, since then until today, Iran give the access to the IAEA inspector all of his duties under the NPT. But additional protocol is something else. Iran accepted voluntarily additional protocol under the JCPOA. And as you said, the Director General of the agency never talked that, okay, that's the voluntary things. That's happened because there is a deal among international powers and Iran. So when the deal is nothing today and nobody's care about the deal, so why in the world Iran should committed under the additional protocol? So as you said, the IAEA General, the Director General of the agency, tried to make some claims that put its organization and its role in the international politics as an important one. But we all know if the political side settled down and all members around the JCPOA and the United States outside the JCPOA, they agreed to implement issues. I am sure that the Director General of the agency would abide by the terms of the deal and easily could dismiss everything there.
Okay, let's move on to what has been prevalent and increasingly so after Iran's response, Elijah Magnier, to the proposal that, or the presentation that the U.S. made, and that is Israel. Now, it's quite, I'm at a loss of words for this piece of news, Elijah Magnier, so help me out. When Israel comes out and talks about how the Mossad chief, quote, Iran nuclear deal won't halt Israeli operations, will not give Iran immunity from Israeli operations. And at the same time, we hear how Israel influences the IAEA, influences the U.S., and yet comes out with this type of posturing. Explain to us how it can get away with it like that.
Well, first of all, we go to the hundreds of nuclear weapons that Iran doesn't have, but Israel has. And the one who had nuclear weapons in the Middle East is Israel, not Iran. So Iran is saying we will not allow, Israel is saying we will not allow for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, when Iran is saying, I don't want to have a nuclear weapon. So what they are inventing here is just making a lot of noise while they are not respecting the IAEA. They don't allow inspectors to go into their nuclear reactors and facilities. And the world is closing an eye on what Israel is doing and has been doing since 1950s. So the Israelis prime minister who go to Germany and speaks about the deal with Iran, that they will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and then the Mossad chief and the defense minister, and all speak the same language. So they are fighting their shadow, really, because Iran is not concerned in this case, because Iran said, I don't want to make a bomb, and if I want to make it, you are not going to stop me. So Iran managed to stop the Israelis with its precision missile, with its armed drone, and with the new capability that Iran has with classical weapons, and doesn't need nuclear weapon to stop Israel from bothering the Iranian in the Strait of Hormuz or in the Red Sea. And that is obvious that Iran can stand up to Israel and put it back in the place where it belongs. So what the Israelis are doing is just raising the voice and attracting more attention when they have nuclear bomb, and they are just accusing Iran from planning to have it, and they're not going to allow Iran to have something that Iran doesn't want to have. So it's a bit pathetic.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, it is pretty serious, Yousof Azizi. Again, this headline of how Israel comes out and makes a statement like that obviously shows that they are either planning to go after sabotaging, or worse yet, I don't know which one's worse, but this one is worse if they're looking at assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, which they've done before. This statement perhaps somewhat indirectly shows their responsibility, though they have never admitted to it. But what's more interesting is the way that, at least it appears, that they have pushed their agenda of derailing the talks on the U.S. in particular, and then, of course, the IAEA. We can't forget, and I'm sure you won't forget, when the Director General Rafael Grossi went to Israel, what was it, a month ago, and talked about Iran's nuclear file. What can be done? I'm wondering what the U.S. says to Israel when something like this comes up. I'm sure it must be reviewed in their talks.
Yeah, as we discussed here, there have been always, the Israelis have been always as an exception in international legal system. And for the United States and European countries, there is no any other alternative. 3 months ago, Rob Malley, the U.S. envoy and U.S. special envoy on Iran's case, talked and testified under the in front of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he argued then, he responded to senators, that the European countries stressed on U.S. to resolve the Iran nuclear issue diplomatically. Because when there is a huge confrontation and crisis, security crisis in the eastern borders of Europe between Russia and Ukraine, the European countries cannot afford and cannot find any other nuclear security issues in the Persian Gulf. So they put a stress on the United States to resolve it diplomatically. We know that the Israelis' role here, one of the aspects of that is to try to, play as a bad police bad, okay? They try to enforce United States to get more and more leverage and score from Iran in the negotiation table. But on the other hand, I think that this case, the Iran nuclear case behind the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Iranian clearly talked that if this is not settled, there is no re-implementation of the JCPOA. So my final point is that the European countries and United States should decide now between the pressure on Israeli side, and what is the logical on preserving the international security?
Well, if you remember, Elijah Magnier, just very recently, I'm not too sure how recent, but the side from the Iranian side, that is, came out and said, you know, we're looking at just a few words here. And in terms of an agreement, if you want to put it that way, that it was very close. And yet we're looking now at a different landscape or picture, I should say. And some are looking towards the political side of things, in particular when you're looking at the U.S. midterms. For example, this one particular headline from an Israeli website said Israel does not anticipate a renewal of Iran's nuclear deal with the world powers before the U.S. midterm elections in November. Do you think then the focus now being on the U.S. to see that being too close to the midterms by not wanting to ruin his chances for losing the House and maybe delaying this until after that?
This is a very good question. But before that, allow me, if I may, to add some of your previous question that all the assassination that Israel was responsible of in Iran and the attempt to interrupt its nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear program, helped Iran to advance in its nuclear program and never stopped Iran from going ahead and reaching from 5% to 60%, centrifuge from the third generation to the ninth generation. So all the sabotage that the Israelis have done or are planning to do will only increase the determination of Iran to move ahead and send a strong message to the Israelis and to the Americans that if you play with our ground, we will make you tremble. Now to your question, this is a very good question because here there is a dilemma. The European foreign minister of the European Commission, let's say, this is more or less his position, Joseph Borrell, said that Iranian requests are reasonable. And then these requests go to the Americans and the Americans say, no, they're not acceptable. So the dilemma here is that Europe is really in need of a 2.5 million barrel of oil that Iran is producing, because on December the 5th, European Union is going to stop buying the oil from Russia, and they don't have any other source to supply them with oil because OPEC said, I can increase the production with 650 to 700,000 barrels per day, but never to meet the Russian production. So the Europeans are really in need of the deal, and they want even to beg Iran to return to JCPOA. But the Americans are saying, well, it is not in my advantage because it is not in the advantage of the, it is in the advantage of the Republican to see Joe Biden signing a deal so they can attack him, and it's not in the advantage of Biden to sign a deal before the midterm election. And it is in his advantage to please the Israelis so they can exert pressure on their lobby to help Joe Biden in recovering some of the lost voices and votes that he can gather in the midterm. So the dilemma is in between the Americans saying to the European, well, we know that the sanctions we and you have imposed on Russia are very hurtful for your citizens, but you have to be patient because we still have some time. And the Europeans are saying, we're paying tens of billions of dollars in compensation because the gas and oil is increasing in price, and we can't cope with all the manifestations that are threatening us in many cities around Europe. And here in Europe, the citizens are starting to really become very angry at the decision of their leaders, because everything is increasing in price. So Europe wants Iran to return. The Americans want Iran to wait until after the elections of the midterm.
Unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Thank you so much for that. Sorry we couldn't get back to a last question for you, Yousof Azizi, Iranian affairs expert from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your input. And Elijah Magnier, they're a journalist and political analyst from Marseille. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From me, Kaveh and the team, it's goodbye until next time.